Dr. Jeff Khumalo, who's author of GBV in South Africa, joins us to expand a little bit on the discussion. Dr. Jeff, as you're affectionately known, but welcome and thank you so much for joining us in studio.
Thank you for having me.
You and I speak on the back of a tragedy that left you with a lot of questions. Your son murdered allegedly by the stepfather. Talk to us a little bit about how that has impacted you and what you really fight and advocate for in society as a result of your personal experience.
Yes, thank you for asking that strictly on the issue of, me losing my son. However, the issue of violence and also gender-based violence in particular, it's been always something that has been, a serious passion for me to be able to make a difference. But however, when, that incident, happened already, the birth of this book was already within my, my plans, because I did my thesis. I went into also making my research about gender-based violence and femicide, especially in South African society specifically. But when that happened, it just, make it very real. It was no longer something that I was passionate about. It just became personal, let me say that. So it affected me in the sense of I need to make sure that I make a difference. I must try my best to use my skills and my education, to teach. I'm holding a PhD in civic education, but now it's no longer a theory to me. Yeah. It's no longer a research. It's a practical thing. It's an experience. To the point whereby I sit down, I said this, I was talking to somebody, I said, the struggles that we experienced, as young people in the early 80s, some perhaps in the 70s when we were not yet, youth enough to be able to see what was going on. But, what our youth today are experiencing is totally different. I know this is a very familiar statement, but to me, it's something different, because it's not about socioeconomic challenges that we're looking at, but it's also a sense of identity. I've realized that if there's something that destroys human beings today, it's a search of belonging and identity, to the point whereby you make a decision based on what people will say. In this case, I can give an example that I felt my son died because of the decisions that were made under the impression of trying to fit in. Perhaps if I may make an example, you see, when you, like I say, he's been murdered by his stepdad, meaning that my son was forcing his way into an environment which he was not allowed to be. But because he was torn apart, he loved his mom. He has to be with his mom. At the same time, he knew that his life was in danger, because I believe, I remember I spoke to him 3 days before he died. I was in the US. He was promising to come home. I said, you need to go home. I'm coming back, I need to find you home. And he said to me, no, you'll find me home. That was the end. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that he consistently mentioned that I love being at home with you guys, but I'm fearing for my mom.
Yeah.
So meaning that he was aware of the abuse which was taking place around the family.
Yeah, and that's quite a heavy load.
A heavy load for a young man.
That young men and women continue to carry in South Africa, which really speaks to the magnitude of the problem. Dr. Khumalo, we know that looking at what President Cyril Ramaphosa has, for instance, said about gender-based violence being the second pandemic.
It is a pandemic. Actually, I mentioned here that it's a social pandemic in one of the chapters. When you go through that, it's no more an event or a tragedy. It's a social pandemic. You're right. So it needs a serious cure. which are my research, and in my research I provide what I call suitable solutions, and I know that many people wrote about this, but with the literature comparison and analysis, I realized that there's a blame shifting. I mentioned this several times.
Yeah.
Young people are blaming parents, parents are blaming young people, parents are blaming teachers, teachers are blaming students, communities are blaming politicians, politicians are blaming the community that they are not taking responsibility. So it's a blame shifting game. Mm-hmm. I believe that we need to be accountable. I believe that each and every individual must take their position to become accountable for each and every decision that we make, and also to let us continue to know that it's good to teach people, especially young people, to be able to know who they are, not to search for an identity somewhere or a sense of belonging, because that is the beginning of a downfall.
But that in itself takes an incredible deal. You speak about accountability. Accountability for me goes hand in hand with education.
True.
It's no use trying to establish who I am as a young person,
True,
going through the many phases of life, yet perhaps with a parent who themselves is yet to establish who they are. And it becomes a vicious circle, which needs a great deal of education.
100%. It's like you read my book. I talk about that recycling the breed, of perpetrators who we are passing on from generation to generation. This pandemic, we are infecting because we are not taking responsibility. Where the problem emanates from what I call leadership bankruptcy. Mm-hmm. We are no longer having leaders. When we talk about leaders, I'm not talking about political leaders, or I'm not talking about specific traditional leaders. Also, I'm talking about as a human being, you need to be responsible and take a position as a leader, to the point whereby your life must be able to, because I've learned something from a teaching background. People, especially young people, they learn from copying than listening. So how we treat our our wives and our sisters at home, our young people are watching. The manner in which I treat my daughter in comparison with my son, the young one is looking. The manner in which I talk to my wife, my son is looking, is watching. So they are very likely to learn from copying more than listening. So education should not only be on formal setup.
Yes.
Let it be a daily thing. For instance, I learned something that many people today who are, for instance, now we are coming from the elections. We see young people are drawn into elections, in large numbers. Mm-hmm. You ask yourself, what is attracting them? Yeah. Mostly it's not because of what they want to do or to serve the nation. Mostly it's because of their lifestyle, which it is attracted, to them, which is led by the people who are in the politics. The type of the cars that they're driving, the types of the lifestyle that they are living, it draws them into politics because they think life is more easier when a politician. It goes up, across the board to even other sectors, religious leadership and corporate, business. People are not actually interested in what you are doing. They are interested in the brand. I like saying that people buy a brand, they don't buy a product.
Yeah, absolutely. You're incredibly right. I mean, it speaks a lot about perceptions.
Yes.
And how one perceives something, which brings me to what you were highlighting just now when you talk about parenthood, guardians, adults, and the children watching, which really speaks to a sense of conscious parenting.
True.
How then, with the many challenges that adults themselves face,
yes,
become so conscious in the manner in which they interact and relate, and perhaps even make mistakes along the way and correct behavior to influence this young human being who he's a much needed leader in his community or her community?
There is a concept that has been developed in America. They call it, alternative violence alternative violence projects.
Yes.
Whereby you create what I call the peer training and workshop groups, whereby people or young people are conscientized, about these things, not by an elderly person, but by someone. Young people are very interesting. When something is done and said by a person of his or her age, it becomes more important to them. So when we do the training and the teaching, we must not bring people who are coming from above or from far away. We must use the people within the community. That's what I call peer training and workshop groups, whereby, young people are taught by the people of their age, which means we pick up, young people of the same age, we train them, we conscientize them, and we give them,
the tools.
The tool.
Yeah.
And they train each other. It becomes more easier.
As you and I round down our discussion, Dr. Jeff Khumalo, talk to me a little bit about the impact or perhaps the influence around this book. Did you take it upon yourself to share the information and also teach it, have it as an extension of your own personal healing project? Did you get justice? I've poured my heart. Yeah. Remember, it is a product of a thesis. I just, transferred it into a readable material. I'm satisfied because this book, it can be a tool. It can be used by anybody from all walks of life. It can be used as a policymaking tool. It can be used as a household guide. It can be used, at a community-based, groups whereby people can use it for workshop purposes, because it has all things that you need: the statistics, the causes, the red flags, which are signs of early, beginning of gender-based violence. I would have liked us to go into the red flags, but unfortunately we've run out of time. But
and those are the most important things that people should know, the red flags, because even a person like you or me, if we don't know that, we can find ourselves living...
Perhaps very quickly.
Yeah.
Just give us in bullet points.
The manner in which people talk to us, it's a sign to know this is an abusive action. I have a child who goes to a school. When you speak something that sounds like xenophobic or perhaps has some racist elements, they are so quick to let you know, no, you don't talk like that, Dad. You understand? So if we can develop those kind of teachings to young people, even when you have some authority over them, they will be able to see that this is wrong. You don't talk to me like that. You don't touch me like that. Even when you are my boss, even when you are my coach, you don't have to speak like that. It becomes a normal thing to say this is anti, social life. This is something else. So those red flags, the manner in which people are demanding, the work at work, because they are masculine, they have to talk to you like, you are their wives. Actually, you are not. You are a colleague. You are a woman, but you are not a wife to that person. So they can't talk to you, even when they demand, maybe the feedback or maybe your deadline on whatsoever. They must not interact with you on the basis that they are a male person and you are a female person. Let it be, I'm the boss, you are my subordinate, but it must not include gender there. So there's a thin line there.
One, while we do have a little bit more time, just looking at the home dynamics, if COVID-19, the pandemic, and the outcome on the number of gender-based violence cases that came out of that has anything to show for what sort of toxicity is in correlation with the symptoms or perhaps the signs of gender-based of violence or abuse.
True. One other thing that I've also discovered is that when people don't love themselves, they'll never be able to love other people. People who are, it has been researched, the people who have a low self-esteem, they are very likely to react in a very, violent way in solving problems. But people who have, a good high esteem, or perhaps maybe they have, self-respect, they are very likely to be able to communicate. They are good communicators. So the from the question that you asked, I wanted to say that when you spend time with people, it means you'll have more time to communicate with them. That's where the problem comes. So if you have a problem of low esteem, you'll feel challenged and then you'll respond violently. So that's when we saw during the time of COVID-19, because we spend much time with our partners at home, we could not, be able to communicate for a long time, unlike those other days and years whereby I go to work, I come back home, I just, it's a good night, good evening, good morning. But when we spend much time, actually it comes to a point of, communication skills. We must be able to teach people how to communicate and to allow to be, to be criticized or to be opposed. If they don't have, enough information about something, they must also realize that, I don't understand this. It doesn't matter where it's coming from, whether it's from your daughter or your son or your wife or your colleague. If you are a good communicator, you'll not lose anything by accepting what you don't agree with. Sometimes we agree to disagree.
Thank you so much. Thank you. A conversation, of course, that could go on for hours on end. Thanking Dr. Jeff Khumalo, author of GBVF in South Africa, expanding on the very serious impact of this second pandemic. We thank him for joining us in studio.